Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Since you clicked on this video, I would assume it's safe to say that you're here to learn about the new features that are in the April 2023 updates to Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. Now, as with any of the bigger releases that Adobe pushes out, this is a mix of small features, fixes, performance improvements, as well as some big new features. But to keep this video relatively short and focused on the exciting stuff, if you're interested in the smaller stuff, you can head over to my blog on my website, where I go into further details about all the updates. And for this, I'm going to focus primarily on the two big new features that have come to both Lightroom or Lightroom Desktop, also referred to as Lightroom Cloud sometimes, or Lightroom CC, and Lightroom Classic. One of those features has already been available in Adobe Camera Raw. That particular feature is the ability to use curves adjustments within your local masks. It's been in Camera Raw for a few months now, and we've been anxiously awaiting it to get added into the Lightroom ecosystem, and it is now available both, again, on Lightroom Desktop and Lightroom Classic. And then the other big feature that's been added is in all three, so Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom, and Lightroom Classic. And it's a bit of a shot across the bow of TOPAZ Labs, as Adobe has now added in AI-powered DeNoise functionality or noise reduction functionality into all three applications. What I will say is, although it's relatively limited in terms of the parameters and settings you've got available to you compared to the TOPAZ DeNoise AI and Photo AI tools, the results are pretty fantastic on most images. There's only one scenario where I've really seen it fail to put out a good result. So this is a huge first step in the right direction for Adobe in terms of getting into this AI kind of photo restoration type stuff. And then the other piece we'll take a look at in both Lightroom and Lightroom Classic is that curves adjustments within masks, and talk about how that can help you with your editing workflow and getting some really nice precise controls available to us that we didn't have in the past. Now, before we get into those demos, I'm going to jump over to Lightroom Classic and show you some user interface updates as well, because otherwise you're going to be watching along and wondering what some of the new things you're seeing are related to. So let's jump into Lightroom Classic and take a look at that, and then we'll walk through the DeNoise and the curves adjustments updates afterwards. Okay, now that we're over here in Lightroom Classic, if we look over at the right-hand panel, my Develop panel, you may notice right off the bat that there's a subtle change here on the left-hand side of each of the sub-panels, and that instead of the older light switches, we now have eyeball icons. This change was done to better align the main Lightroom editing interface with the Lightroom masking interface, where we've had the eyeball since that was released back in October of 2021. It also better aligns Lightroom Classic with Lightroom Desktop or Lightroom Cloud, as well as Adobe Camera Raw. So this is a nice little quality of life update. I'll show you really quickly how they work, and then I'll show you one more thing before we get into the two bigger updates of DeNoise and curves and masking. So essentially these eyeballs here work just like they do within masking. So if I simply come over to one of the eyeballs, say on the basic panel where you can see I've got several adjustments made, if I click and hold on the eyeball, it temporarily disables all of those adjustments. One other nice little update that they made with this is, in the past, the little switches or on-off switches that we had on each of the panels, there wasn't one for the basic panel, so you had no way to temporarily turn it off or permanently turn it off to see what impact you had made with the adjustments within that panel. Now we've got the eyeball in every single panel. So again, click and hold to temporarily disable it. Let go of your mouse button to re-enable those adjustments. The other nice thing with this is the on-off switches add in a history step every time you turn a panel on and off, which just created a lot of clutter in your history panel. Also, as that history gets longer, it can start impacting performance, so they've resolved that with the eyeballs. Toggling that eyeball on and off temporarily doesn't add in your history steps anymore. Now, they did include the ability to go back to the legacy switches. Main reason being, if you upgrade from an older version of Lightroom to Lightroom version or Lightroom Classic 12.3, and you had a panel disabled in that older version, you need to be able to re-enable it in the new version. So if I simply hold down Alt or Option, you'll notice that all of the eyeballs change to switches. And again, the switch disappears or isn't available for the basic panel because this is the legacy functionality. So hold down Alt or Option, you'll switch over to your switches. And then if I were to come into, say, the tone curve and hold down Alt or Option, I can turn that off. And now, even though I'm no longer holding onto my mouse button, that panel remains disabled or grayed out, and I can no longer see its adjustments. I also can't make any adjustments within here. Now, looking at the eyeballs now, you'll also notice that some of them are grayed out, some of them are white, and that tone curve panel is now grayed out, and it's got a strike through running through it. That's because the grayed out panels are ones that no adjustments have been made on, so I know I haven't applied any lens corrections, I haven't done any transformation adjustments, and I haven't added any HSL adjustments on this particular image. If I open up HSL, as soon as I make an adjustment, you can see that the eyeball is now white. If I clear that adjustment out, it goes back to gray. And then again, tone curve, I went in and used the legacy switch to turn it off, so that's why that's got the strike through the eyeball. If I hold down Alt or Option and I turn that back on, now it comes back with the eyeball, and the eyeball is white because, again, I've made adjustments here. Now, the other thing you may have noticed in here in Lightroom Classic is we have some new indicators around our different tool sets. So if a particular tool set has adjustments within it, you'll now see a little dot indicator under that tool set to let you know adjustments have been applied. So in this case, I have adjustments within every single one of these tool sets, my edit tool set, cropping, healing, and masking, but no edits or adjustments within the red eye correction panel. The other nice quality of life update they've made here, besides those indicator dots, is you'll notice that a couple of them are red. There's also underneath the histogram in the lower right corner a warning symbol telling me I have update AI settings. So if I go into, for instance, my masks, we can see I have that same warning. Some AI masks may need to be updated, and I have an option to update all. And then there's a warning indicator on each of these mask groups, and they're currently blank. So if I expand out this sky mask group, for instance, we can see there is a sky 1 mask in here, but it is currently disabled because it needs to be updated. So this is an AI generated mask. And whether this is a case of needing to update it after upgrading from Lightroom Classic 12.2 to 12.3 or something else changed with the mask, I need to update it in order to use that mask and see the adjustments that were made with it. The mountains mask also includes a sky 1 that I inverted, so I can only select the mountains. But again, it's got that AI sky mask, so it's also disabled until I update it. So I can simply hit update all. It'll run through the process of redetecting using the AI algorithm. And now you can see it's updated, and both the sky masks are now enabled again on this image. So if I hover on the sky general, you can see that the white, in this case, the overlay is white and indicating that only the sky is going to be adjusted. And then on the mountains one, I've got that sky mask inverted, and you can see the mountains are being impacted. The other area where we see this is on the healing tools, and specifically the content-aware healing. It doesn't happen with the older legacy clone or spot healing, but content-aware may need to be updated. And you can actually see this on the image if I look at some of these spots as I move my cursor back and forth. There's an adjustment here for a dust spot or a water spot on the lens. And you can see right now that dust spot is no longer removed. Same thing over here with these two. They're dust spots that I removed previously, but until I update the content-aware fill or content-aware healing, those dust spots are now visible. So just like with the mask, I'm going to come in here and hit update all. It's going to redetect, and now all of those spots are healed again. Now, I would recommend in a case like this, if you had some healing that you did with the content-aware tool, after you do the update, it's probably worth going in and looking at each individual one to see if you're still getting the good, clean heal that you want. For instance, if you used on the content-aware the little box selection to control where the heal was being pulled from within the image, you may need to redo that a couple times or make some other adjustments to that content-aware healing to get a good result again. Okay, now that we've gotten those user interface or quality of life updates out of the way for Lightroom Classic, like I said, I wanted to cover those since you're going to see them on screen anyways, and I didn't want there to be confusion or questions. But that's now out of the way, so let's get into the good stuff. So I've jumped over to a different image here in Lightroom Classic, and let's talk through the ability to do curves adjustments within masking now, which if you're familiar with Photoshop or you've played around in Photoshop at all, you may have used or heard about curves, layers, adjustments within Photoshop and using those in conjunction with layer masks. But the main takeaway is to know if you've been looking for ways to do curves adjustments or curves adjustment layers or masks within Lightroom, we now have a very similar solution. So let's jump over here and take a look at that. So looking at this particular image, I've got the tone curve panel open on the global adjustments, and you can see that I have made adjustments to the tone curve. I've set my white point in the upper right, I pulled in my black point in the lower left, and I've got some additional point adjustments along the curve. Now, I'm not going to go into a full tutorial about how the tone curve works, so this is kind of assuming you have at least a basic understanding of it. I do plan to do a deeper dive of this, both the tone curve in general, then how to apply it within masking, but let's take a quick look here just to get the concept out of the way and show you how it works within the masking module. Now, the problem here, of course, is I'm using the tone curve to control my white and black points, as well as adding in contrast, and in particular in black and white photos, I'm adding in a lot of contrast often to get some additional drama and moodiness or feel or whatever to it, more so than I would do in my color photos. But in the case of an image like this, I have to pick a tone curve in the global panels that best fits or best works with the overall image. So for instance, if I wanted to make a more dramatic sky by using the tone curve, I could do so, but then my foreground or the landscape may not work with that tone curve. Vice versa, if I want to do it for the landscape, it may not work for the sky. So that's where the curves adjustments in quote unquote layers, or in Lightroom's case, masking, comes into play. So let me go into this global tone curve panel. I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key. I'm going to turn off this panel completely for the sake of this walkthrough. And then I'm going to come up to my masking panel and open it. So now in this case, using this example, I mentioned wanting to do a different tone curve in the sky and then the landscape or the foreground. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and create a new mask. I'm going to do a select sky mask. And now if I hover on this, we can see that it's got the sky selected. And if I come down below, in this case, I was playing with this earlier, so my curve panel is already opened up, but I've got solo mode enabled within my masking panel to keep this a little bit more compact. If I wasn't in the curve panel, I would just have to scroll down, or in this case, come down, click to open it up. And now you can see that we've got the tone curve panel basically identical to what we have in the global adjustments. The only difference here is we don't have a parametric curve, which if you're not familiar with that, I wouldn't really worry about it. It's kind of tone curve with training wheels. But we have the regular point curve, and we still have the RGB channel curves as well. The other thing worth noting here is that the histogram displayed in the background of the masked tone curve is not the same as your overall global histogram. So what it's doing is it's looking at the mask selection. So in this case, the white part, or the sky mask that I created, and it's creating a histogram specifically for that area of the image. So you can see exactly where your white and black points are, where your peaks and troughs are in terms of the histogram for that specific selection. So now if I wanted to come in here and make an adjustment to that sky, I want to pull in the white point and set that. I'm going to pull in that black point and set that. Now I'm just doing this kind of quick and dirty for the sake of this demo. So I can use the eyeball and turn on and off and see what I've done there, and note that I'm not impacting the landscape at all. But now the best way that I like to approach this is using the target adjustment tool, which is this little circle that has arrows appear when you hover on it. If I click on that and activate it, now I can go out to the image and I can click on any part of that mask and pull it up or down, and it'll make a corresponding adjustment on the tone curve line. So right now we've got a straight line in the tone curve. If I come out here and let's say I want to brighten this tonal range, this lighter tones in this little wispy cloud area here, I simply click and hold, and I'm going to drag my cursor up and I'm going to brighten it. Now right now what I've done is I've also brightened basically every other tone on that curve. So instead of having a straight line, everything's lifted above that line, but I'm trying to add contrast in here. So now I'm going to come in and pick a darker region. I'm going to pull down, and now that's going to darken it. And I can get a nice dramatic contrast in place there as much as I want. And again, we're not impacting any other part of the image other than that sky mask. So now again, if I come over to my eyeball icon for the tone curve panel, click and hold it to temporarily disable it, you can see just that quickly, I've made a huge dramatic difference to the look and feel of the image, in this case, the sky part of the image. So if I double click on this, let's just name this Sky Curves Adjustment. And let's do the same thing for the landscape. So I'm going to select the sky again, but this time I'm going to invert it. So now when I hover on this, the white area is just on the landscape. And again, I'm going to come down to my curves panel. I'm going to set my white point. I'm going to set my black point. And now I can do the same thing with the target adjustment tool. Of course, you can come in just to the curve directly and just click and drag up and down as many points as you want to make those adjustments. But I prefer to use the target adjustment tool. So let's activate that again. And again, let's say I want to brighten that particular tonal range a bit, but I still want to darken down and have that strong contrast with the shadows. I can pull that in a little bit. And again, looking with the eyeball tool, turning it on and off temporarily, we can see just with 2 clicks and a couple of dragging motions, I've made a significant difference to the image just like that. So hopefully that gives you a baseline understanding of how these curves adjustments within masking can be incredibly powerful. Really, it can replace the need to mess with a good amount of the sliders. You don't need to necessarily work with the shadow and highlight slider, so on and so forth. And the advantage of the tone curve over just using the contrast slider is, of course, with the contrast slider, it's just applying contrast universally as Adobe sees fit, really, based on the algorithm that they're using for the contrast slider. With this, I can control very easily where I'm adding contrast within the histogram or within the tone curve. So if I look at these 2 masks, and let's rename this one really quickly, Foreground Curves Adjustment. If I bounce between these 2, watch the tone curve panel down here, and you'll see how it changes from one to the other and where I'm applying those points in that contrast. If I go back to my sky mask, you can see the histogram updates to indicate what the histogram is just for the sky. But you can see my points are very different from where I've applied them for the foreground or the landscape, as well as being applied to a different area or a different histogram, because the landscape histogram and tonal ranges are a little bit different, or actually quite a bit different from the sky. So if I wanted to apply more contrast more in the upper range or the highlights range, I could do that by controlling where I place my points. Conversely, if I want to control my contrast in the midtones or the shadows, I can do that again by choosing where I apply those points on the tone curve. With the contrast slider, I can't do that. I just get what I get. Okay, so now that we've gone through the curves adjustment masking piece, let's stay on this image and get into the update that I'm probably most excited about. Actually, I'm really excited about the curves adjustment piece, but the next piece, the DeNoise or AI-powered noise reduction, has been really, really impressive so far in the testing I've done. I've only run into one scenario where it's not working out so well, and that is with night sky or astrophotography. For whatever reason, if you're working with a higher ISO file, it adds in a bunch of little swirls and streaks. It's like it's picking up noise and connecting dots between stars and stuff. Aside from that, that is disappointing, but aside from that, the results I'm getting are easily on par with, or really, I feel, surpass anything I'm getting out of TOPAZ DeNoise AI or Photo AI. And the great thing about it is, unlike those TOPAZ applications, which add a default level of sharpening, even if you turn sharpening all the way down in the DeNoise tools, Lightroom is not adding any artificial sharpening back into the image. You still have your global sharpening adjustments that you have available to you, but it's not baking it into the file. Now, I mentioned baking it in the file because this isn't like the legacy noise reduction tools that we've had for years and years and years, where you do it simply on the image, just like any other adjustment, and you're good to go. You do run a separate process where it uses the AI algorithm to analyze the image and clean up the noise, and then it spits out a separate DNG file. That also means there are some limitations right now, which hopefully Adobe will address those in the future. They're talking about addressing those with future updates. But right now, you can't run the new AI DeNoise tool on a DNG file. You can't run it on JPEGs. It only works on Bayer and Xtrans files, which, if you're not familiar with those, probably nothing you really need to worry about for the most part. If you're working with a RAW file, it's going to be okay, but there are some limitations there. The other big frustration I have, which you'll see in a minute, is when you get into the preview window for the new DeNoise tool, the default zoom is at 200%, which means you basically can't tell what you're looking at. For the before and after preview you get, that helps you gauge what amount you want to use in terms of the new AI DeNoise. So hopefully they give us the ability to change that zoom level either with a slider or some preset levels, so you can go, maybe you want to view it at 50% or 100%. I would prefer 100% and a bigger window, frankly, but right now it's stuck at 200%. You have no way to change it. You can zoom all the way out, but you can't change the zoom level once you start zooming in. So that's a little frustrating and makes the previews really kind of useless to an extent. You get a rough idea, but if you're really trying to gauge what kind of result you get, you can't, meaning that you may end up producing multiple DNG files. If you get one that's produced and you see that, hey, I needed to use a lower amount or a higher amount, you can't see that when you preview it. You can only see it when you get the final file. So I have had some instances where I've run multiple DeNoise processes and ended up with multiple DNGs that either I have to go in and delete or I just let them take up hard drive space. So anyways, minor gripes aside, the results are really, really fantastic. So let's take a look at that here in Lightroom Classic real quickly. So sticking with this file here, let's get out of the tone curve panel and go down to the detail panel. And now that we're here, you see you still have your sharpening adjustments just like we always have, but now there's a new noise reduction section for DeNoise. Reduced noise with AI, the result will be saved as a new DNG. And then down below, you've got all of your legacy noise reduction tools. So your luminance, detail, contrast, etc. Now, there is some debate as to, is it better to do this at the beginning of your process, the end of the process, middle process somewhere? Adobe hasn't really said. If you follow the guidance from Topaz Labs, for instance, they generally recommend you do it around the beginning of the process. So far in my testing, I can't say I'm really noticing a difference in results by doing it at the end versus the beginning or vice versa. What I would say, though, is obviously it's a lot nicer to work with a clean file from the get-go. Also, when you do it at the end, like I'm about to do here in this example, the issue you run into is if I've already got sharpening applied, which I do, or I've done texture adjustments or clarity adjustments, I may find that without the noise causing softness in the image, that I need to go back and tweak those settings. So at the very least, I would do it before you do anything, certainly with sharpening or clarity or texture. But personally, I believe my workflow is going to just go from a standpoint of do it right off the bat, maybe do a basic adjustment to light and exposure if I need to or something, but do the denoise immediately and then go in and do the rest of my editing on an image. So that out of the way, let's jump in here. So I can click on the denoise button. The other way to get to it is to right click on the image or the thumbnail for the image and open your enhance panel. Once I do that, it'll start generating the preview. And you can see right off the bat here what I mean about that preview window is it's kind of pointless. It's picked central point of the image, but it's so zoomed in, I can pan this around and it'll update the preview, but it's still pretty hard to tell at this zoom level where you're starting to see pixel detail exactly how good it's doing or bad it's doing. You can zoom out, as I said, all the way and click on a specific point. So maybe I could see this transition between the sky and the landscape. That's a little better. If you click and hold on the preview, it shows you before and after, so you can kind of gauge your results here. But I do wish you could zoom out a little bit. I don't find it really useful. Or if they're going to force you to zoom at 200%, give me a bigger preview window. Let me take it full screen or something so I can see more of the image. That aside, you can see we've got an amount slider. Now I've been playing with this, so the amount's at 68 currently. The first time you come in here, it'll be at 50. Typically, I'm finding that somewhere in the 60 to 70 range seems to work best for most images, but of course it does vary image to image. This one, we're just going to leave it as it is. You'll also notice that you don't have the ability to take advantage of the super resolution or the upscaling feature that they added a couple years ago. That is not available in conjunction with DeNoise. It is something Adobe has said that they will support in the future, but right now, you can only do one or the other. Since you can't run DeNoise on a DNG file, if you do super resolution, you can't take that DNG and run it through DeNoise. Again, should be coming in the future, but right now, that is a limitation worth knowing about. You'll also see here AI settings such as content aware remove and masking will be updated automatically, which may cause visible changes to the result. So because we're changing the file, it's got to recompute any AI-based adjustments you've made. So it's got to recompute your content aware by scanning the new DNG and making those adjustments, and same thing with any AI mask like skies or person masks, things of that nature. You also have the ability to add the new DNG into a stack, which is generally what I do just from an organizational standpoint, and then it provides an estimated time of 9 seconds. Now, generally what I'm finding is it takes about that estimated time. Sometimes it does run a little over. The demo here, you may see it run longer simply because I'm also running screen recording software. The thing to note is this works very quickly on my desktop computer, which is pretty beefy. On my laptop, it's not even working correctly. I've got a Surface Book 2 from 2018, which at the time was pretty powerful, but it is starting to show its age. I can launch DeNoise, and it shows me estimated times of anywhere from like 20 to 35 minutes, but the preview is not even generating. It just sits and spins, and then eventually it crashes and fails, and the GPU actually gets disabled within the Lightroom preferences. Whether that is an opportunity for Adobe to do some optimization and bug fixing, or it's just I've hit the limitations of that older laptop, I'm not sure, but it's something to be aware of. If you have hardware limitations, you may not be able to take advantage of this new feature, which is a bummer, but also it's kind of just the nature of the beast with progressing technology. So let's go ahead and hit Enhance. Now you can see in the upper left corner, you get your progress bar, just like we're used to seeing if we're doing any other intensive tasks such as exporting or importing or what have you. You might be able to hear my GPU fans kicking up a little bit. And now if we go down here, you can see I have enhanced-nr-2.dng. So that's my new file. I've already run enhance on that original file once, so this is the reason it's got the 2 suffix. But now if I look at the image and I zoom in at 100%, you can see how much cleaner that is compared to the original, which if I come over to that. So that's the original file. Now I did have luminance noise reduction applied to this already. I've also got sharpening masking to pull it out of the sky a little bit in terms of the noisiness, but you can still see it's quite noisy in here. Whereas if I come over to the new DNG that was generated through the DeNoise process, much, much, much cleaner output than what I could get with the old manual noise reduction tools. The other thing to note is it does clear out your old manual noise reduction settings. If you already had any applied, it wipes those out because you're getting a clean file to begin with. It does not, however, change any of your sharpening adjustments or anything like that. But you can see This result is far, far cleaner throughout, especially in that sky. And on black and white images like this, where I'm making big pushes in contrast, oftentimes that's when you really get a lot of grain and noise introduced, even on a low ISO file. You can see it's done a really, really nice job of cleaning all of this up. And also in retaining the finer details, it's done a really good job. So unlike with using the old manual noise reduction luminance slider where things can get very muddy looking very quickly, you don't have any of those issues here. Now, I've mentioned a couple times at this point that DeNoise does a really good job of preserving the fine details. When I talk about that, I'm talking about the ability to not just preserve the fine details, but not introduce artifacting. Again, like we often see with the tools from TOPAZ Labs. Now, I personally haven't used the DxO noise reduction software. I've heard it's better, but a frustration with TOPAZ on top of the sharpening that's always applied, whether you want it or not, is it oftentimes introduces quite a bit of artifacting in areas where there's finer details. The AI-powered DeNoise that I've played with so far in Lightroom is doing a far, far better job. So let's take a look at another sample here, one last sample real quickly to show you what I'm talking about there. Now in this particular image, I've already run it through the DeNoise process, so we're not going to go through that again since you've already seen it. But if I zoom in on this moose and I look at this particular area here of the antler, you can see there's some little debris and stuff in there. If you've watched my look at Photo AI when that came out back in September, October, can't remember which, this was an area that it struggled with a little bit. It lost some of those details. The other area it really struggled with was in the fur here. It would clean it up, but it was also introducing a whole bunch of artifacting and weird kind of blockiness or textures. And we were seeing the same thing in this foliage that is in the foreground and background, where it would clean up the noise, but then you had some of that over sharpening and some of those artifacts that were being introduced by Photo AI. And I see the same thing with TOPAZ Labs DeNoise AI as well. So it's not just a matter of Photo AI being new and being problematic. If we come over and look at the Lightroom output with their new AI DeNoise, look at how absolutely clean that is, but also the preservation of detail is just phenomenal. We've got all those little details in here still. If I try to match up these two, you can see this is the original file without any denoise, and I don't have any manual denoise applied at this point either, or sharpening for that matter. And then if I come over to the new DNG output, all of that detail is still there, and there's no blotchiness, there's no artifacting or blocking that we see again with some of those TOPAZ tools. Same thing with the fur. It is perfectly cleaned up. All of that fine detail is still there, and there's no artifacting whatsoever. This is a far better result than anything I was able to get out of the TOPAZ apps. And again, not to be a broken record, but if you look at the foliage, same exact thing. Absolutely clean. There's no artifacting. There's no over sharpening. It is just a phenomenal output. This is, again, I know I've said it a couple times, but this is better than anything I was able to achieve with TOPAZ. On stems like this, that's often where you'd see the over sharpening issues with TOPAZ. And again, the antler and the fur is just a prime example of really the phenomenal job Adobe's done on their first release of AI-powered noise reduction. This is really, really impressive stuff. So again, hopefully they continue to develop it and enhance it and add some new functionality in terms of zoom control, working with super resolution, working with other file types like JPEGs and DNGs that you might already have in your library. But this first pass is really, really good. Now, I am a little concerned. Adobe rolled out the super resolution upscaling tool to quote unquote compete with TOPAZ Gigapixel and other software services like that. They rolled that out 2 years ago, and since then they have done 0 updates to it. It's very limited. The results are not necessarily the best all the time. It can add in some color artifacting and things like that. So from a basic marketing checkbox, super resolution checks that box. But then they've basically abandoned it, and so far have given no indication they're going to go back and do any improvements to it. Hopefully from a competitive standpoint they will, but 2 years have passed and they've not done that. If they do that with the DeNoise, you can see you're getting really good results, but I can't use it on astrophotography so far from what I've seen and tested. It's just not giving good results in the sky with stars. And the other tools like Photo AI and DxO are going to continue to improve and get better over time as well. So the big advantage here is the results we're getting on certain files, and really most files I've looked at. Again, the night sky stuff seems to be an aberration so far. And it's free as part of your Adobe subscription. You're not paying extra for a software bundle like you have to do with TOPAZ. So great results, definitely the right price. The question is, will Adobe continue to support it and improve it over time as we go forward? They've talked about some updates to it, but I will say the jury is still out because unfortunately Adobe doesn't have the best track record with that. Anyways, instead of rambling on about it, I do plan to do a deeper dive look into the new AI-powered denoise or noise reduction in Lightroom and do some side-by-side comparisons with Photo AI. I don't think I'm going to bother looking at TOPAZ denoise AI, as at this point it seems Photo AI is really giving results on par or better. If I get a poor result in Photo AI, I may compare all three, but at least I want to do that side by side so you can really see what I'm talking about with the results we're getting out of this free denoise tool now in Lightroom compared to something you're going out and spending a not insignificant amount of money on and maybe not getting as good a result. So look for that in the coming weeks as well. Now, otherwise, again, I do go into some more details about these updates in my blog post, so I've linked that down below. If you found this video helpful, as always, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, and turn on notifications so you can be aware of when I release new videos going forward. If you really liked the video, you can hit the super thanks button down below and make a small contribution to help support me in terms of continuing to provide content like this going forward. Otherwise, thank you for watching. I hope you did find this helpful, and until next time, take care.